Hello, everyone. I hope you're enjoying the RIMS virtual conference. I'm Amanda Combs with Sedgwick Brand Protection. During this session, we're going to discuss the recall landscape and what you need to know. During this session, we'll cover some trends. We'll talk about recall planning, recall readiness, the true cost of a recall, and global challenges we see when executing recalls. We always say it's not a matter of if you will have a recall, but really when you will have a recall. In the US alone, 7.9 recalls are announced daily on an average basis, with 2020 totaling 2,868 recalls across all industries. And based on Safetygate data, 2,253 alerts on dangerous products were sent out across 31 countries. Those alerts resulted in 5,377 follow-up actions across Europe to eliminate further unsafe items, and were significantly higher in November and December. Now, for those of you that don't know, Safetygate was created in 2003 and is the EU's rapid alert system for dangerous non-food products. So the numbers include consumer products and products for professional use, but do not include medical equipment and food products. Regulators globally are taking special interest in toy products, making this one of the top product categories nationally due to the type of user and expectations around protection with these products. And I'm sure it's no surprise that PPE and other COVID-related products have also been a global focus lately. We've seen several alerts for masks and hand sanitizers, and we anticipate this to continue to be a focus in 2021. Now, with all of this, we still continue to see a number of companies that never expect to have a recall and are unprepared. And again, it's not a matter of if a recall will occur, but really when. So companies need to be prepared. You don't want to wait for a real recall to figure it out. And you certainly don't want it on social media before you're ready. So some companies, recalls are a part of doing everyday business. But for many companies that have not had one or not had one occur in years, they're really a big surprise. And this surprise tends to turn into a fire drill where they're unprepared and unaware on what they need to do. And this can have bad consequences for the company. We see missteps occur in this scenario all the time. Awareness and preparation are key before a recall occurs. We also see all the time when an issue pops up and suddenly a company runs to get an old recall or communication plan, and they have to dust it off to reference what to do. And by the time they figure it out, the damage may have already been done. While having recall insurance is absolutely a step in the right direction, companies need to take a step further and ensure they're prepared to effectively execute a recall. Now, we used to hear people say they were planning for the unthinkable. And as we just demonstrated, that's really not the case. Companies instead need to do a better job of planning for when they do have a product safety issue. The four main focus areas of risk, based on my experience, include non-compliance from a regulatory perspective, not adequately managing public relations, failure to understand the legal ramifications, and not being prepared to effectively execute. It's important to understand what your regulatory requirements are, so you remain compliant with the agency, but also don't risk penalties. For example, CPSC just levied civil penalty for failure to report for roughly $8 million. Companies need to understand what the triggers are for reporting to avoid such penalties. And for companies reporting to FDA, there's a difference between stock recovery, recall, and withdrawal, all of which have different reporting requirements. You need to ensure you know who you need to report to. Is it FDA, Health Canada, CPSC? If international, is it HPRA or other authorities? If you're a drug manufacturer who would normally report to FDA, could you also report to CPSC? What if the cap on your drug isn't childproof? You also need to ensure you clearly understand how you go about reporting and what those timelines look like. You want to ensure you stay in front of a product safety issue, and really remaining compliant through the process will leave you in good standing with the agency. Now, in today's information world, it's only part of the job to meet regulatory requirements with government agencies. The other half is demonstrating to the public, your customers, consumers, maybe plaintiffs' attorneys, that you did the responsible thing as a company. A major product recall can become a nightmare for your company if not handled properly. You need to be prepared to handle tough questions and potentially while an investigation is still occurring. You should proactively identify how you will handle media-related inquiries. Don't delay or provide quick responses. Don't just wing responses. Plan for social media. Who is reviewing posts and comments? Who is responding? Otherwise, a delay in those could look like you're denying or even hiding the situation. And legal considerations may overlap with regulatory piece of this, as there's a gray area around requirements. So some companies may need to involve attorneys to help navigate certain areas or provide clarity around some of those requirements. Now, some of these attorneys can help with FDA inspections and reduce increased infiltration, which is always good. Even though a recall does not automatically make a manufacturer liable, companies still need to be prepared for potential product liability claims like class action lawsuits and potential litigation. These can spiral out of control very quickly, depending on the product and the user. Now, I mentioned earlier that we see companies still so underprepared, and it really baffles me the amount of companies that do not think they will have anything wrong with their products and end up being completely underprepared when a product safety issue arises. I think one of the last times I was able to travel, I visited a company and their recall plan was last updated in 1998 and also referenced faxing. Now, recall readiness can really make or break a recall. It's really important for companies to ensure they have the appropriate SOPs and processes in place and that they're up to date based on how people communicate today, how the supply chain works today, and what's going to drive the most effectiveness in your recall. But it's not just important to have the plans in place. You need to ensure the team is trained on the plan, knows their role, deliverables, and timelines, as roles and responsibilities can change over time. So many times we've talked to people who have left a position in the recall lifecycle and got pulled right back in for the next event as replacements weren't adequately trained or up to speed on the processes. Mock simulations can help avoid this, to test the plan and to test the training. Conducting mock recalls with major SOP changes, or when you've gone about 12 to 18 months without a recall, is a smart move and highly recommended. You can really tell when a company has done this appropriately. And for those who have recall insurance, many times part of the premium can be used for these types of preparation activities. Now, it's important to factor into a recall and mock recalls all of the steps in the recall lifecycle, especially those that may be specific to your industry and product type. Don't take the easy product and easy distribution to practice with. Many people think recalls are easy, and that it's just as easy as reversing the supply chain you use to get product into the marketplace. And they're really a lot more complicated, especially if product is distributed globally, which I'll highlight in more detail in just a couple of minutes. But it is critical to be prepared in advance of all of these. Remember, any missteps could impact your standing with regulatory agencies and hurt your defense if litigation pops up. Once you know you have a problem and need to take action, consigning identification is the next step. You need to put a box around impacted products and identify who to notify. Companies can sometimes struggle to identify these immediate customers due to system changes. We've seen a lot of mergers and acquisitions, but completing this step accurately and quickly impacts the rest of the recall cycle. And notifications are critical. It's up to the manufacturer to prove to the customer, and in some cases, the plaintiff, that the recall notification was received and was sufficient with explaining the hazard and actions to take. The standard for some industries is a US mail notification without traceability. Others utilize a traceable method that can be documented and proven. Was the notice and remedy strong enough to encourage participation? Did you reach the right audience? And can you prove that? Those are the questions that will be asked if further issues arise. And responses. The key is also to document those responses. This confirms someone received the notice and knows what action to take. It also allows you to follow up with those who do not respond. And keep in mind how different customers can respond as well. Your distributor may email a response with everything you need, but someone else may want to call in and speak with someone. And if product's not corrected in the field and needs to be returned, it's important to ensure this is done compliantly, that any of the recall product is not accidentally mingled with good inventory and is also properly reconciled for regulatory reporting. Once a customer receives the notice and takes action, they'll need to be remedied. And this is often through a credit, reimbursement, fulfillment, or replacement, and again, can vary based on the type of customer they are. Now, given all that, I'm sure a lot of you are thinking about the cost associated with completing these requirements and each step of the process. And we do get asked a lot for the costs associated to effectively executing a recall. But don't just think about the costs associated with sending notifications or standing up a call center or product returns. The real cost, if recalls are delayed or mishandled, which I alluded to earlier, can be damage to the brand integrity. An agency may mandate a shutdown of production lines or plants, or even worse, we've seen several companies go out of business. I've also seen stock prices take a quick 10 to 20% hit for poor recall execution. And if recalls are not reported or delayed, maybe mishandled, deemed insufficient, then companies can be at risk for those civil penalties I mentioned earlier, or even criminal penalties. And some of these are in the millions of dollars. I'm also aware of executives that have gone to prison for knowingly distributing contaminated product. All of this contributes to the brand damage and will decline customer loyalty that can make it difficult to recover from. So if a company is faced with a product safety issue, they should take responsibility, quickly disseminate the word on the recall, and provide multiple avenues for customers to get information and respond. Now, from my experience, if recalls are handled properly, then the marketplace can be very forgiving and consumer confidence can be restored in just a short amount of time. They can also be less costly if managed appropriately. Recalls are really just a part of doing business, so it's critical to know how to do them right. Now, I talked in the beginning about some of the international stats and predictions, and as we look at the marketplace, it's evident that there's a trend towards globalization that includes widespread distribution of products across various countries. And it's increasingly common for manufacturers to experience global product recall, which brings added complexities. Last year, 32% of FDA recalls had product distributed to other countries. And companies must also be aware of regulatory requirements governing global markets in which they operate. And they need to understand practicalities on how they will execute recalls in various countries. Many manufacturers rely on distributors and affiliates to report and execute the recall on their behalf in each country. But manufacturers should have clear agreements with those distributors that define respective recall responsibilities. So one of the clear areas around complexity is just the reporting. If you distribute product globally, it's critical to understand the regulatory requirements of reporting recalls and correction. Who's the agency? What information are they looking for? How involved do they need to be? And what are the timing requirements? Again, for example, Health Canada requires manufacturers to notify them within 24 hours of making the decision to recall. So understanding the differences between the agencies can be very complicated. So many manufacturers rely on their local affiliates and distributors. Another example, HPRA has a market compliance section who's responsible for recalls in Ireland. They'll work in conjunction with the manufacturer on the decision whether or not any market action is required, and they'll look to approve communication prior to issuance. Other agencies around the globe could include the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare, or MHLW in Japan. MHLW may issue direct safety communications to hospitals, associates, ACPs, etc. Now, these are just some of the agencies that you may need to deal with, but you could have to deal with many, many more. So again, very important to have a good grasp on what's required. Now, regulatory variances aren't the only difference we see for global recalls, and based on my experience, here are just additional pitfalls to be aware of when executing a recall globally. So think about notification complexities. Understand language requirements and how translations will be done. For example, again, Health Canada requires letters in English and French. I would suggest using caution when using a translation house. Technical expertise is highly recommended to ensure accurate translations. And if you have multilingual notifications, you'll likely have multilingual call center. So you need to understand support infrastructure and scope of the recall. Don't just assume your distributor can handle a spike in call volume. And you can look for additional areas to save costs based on low volume. So if you distributed 10 units in Italy, it may not make sense to staff with a live Italian agent. You can look for website, email, or IVR options to reduce live calls. So make sure all regions are sharing the same information and message, regardless of how the message is being communicated. Now, if there's product to be returned, you will need a compliant and effective returns process. So understand how you're going to retrieve the product. Can it go back to affiliates or distributors within country? Will product need to cross borders? And in many cases, it might be easier to consolidate and destroy or recycle product in centralized locations. This way you maintain more control. And make sure you know what the requirements are for that. You'll also want to make sure, again, that product is quarantined away from good inventory. Now this plays into product remedy and resolution. Understand the regional differences with remedy. So reimbursement checks are commonly used in the US, but less commonly used throughout EU, where maybe vouchers or gift cards may be a better option. So I've been executing product recalls for about 16 years now, and I can say that preparation is the single most important tool based on my experience. I hope you all enjoyed this session on the recall landscape and what you need to know. Thank you.